The whole situation feels very much like the temperature's rising and hasn't burst into flame yet, and you're hoping that it doesn't reach the point where it does. Everything that he's doing in these clips, he is sharper, he is smarter, he is more decisive, his handle is better, his decision making is quicker, he's not
Oh
delaying.
my God, the handle. That was
Like, I'm expressing this opinion or I have this question. But like, I don't think I'm better than you. And so like, I want to be able to respond to those things and try and have a conversation because I do learn a lot from fans. Like, I never, ever assume I know what type of person any of the players that I cover are. I've covered Nikola Jokic for 10 years. I have no idea who he is. I know who he is with me. I know who he is on the court. I know what people say about him.
All right, welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Will Jones, here as always with Grace Jean, and perhaps our most famous guest. What do you think?
Yes, I am very excited to introduce Matt Moore, the co-host of Locked On Nuggets. He's also a host of Buckets on the Action Network, and maybe his most famous moniker of all is the big bad of Nuggets Twitter at HP Basketball. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're excited to get into it. Lots of stuff to get into with the preseason. In case anybody hasn't heard, Matt is not a Nuggets fan. I was wondering why it's so important to you that readers and listeners of your consumers of your various content streams know that you're not a fan of the team that you cover.
One, I want to be very transparent and honest about my intentions because I think the agenda is it's a very large part of the modern media environment, and it's not always a negative. I think it's okay for you to be. I think there's a lot of ways in which it's good if you're a fan of a team and an analyst. Like, I don't think you can look at Adam Maraz's work and be like, it really cost him that he's a Nuggets fan. Like, you just can't say that, right? Like, he benefits from the passion that he has for it and that connection that he's able to build with people. But for me, like, I'm not necessarily looking to I would like to build a community of people that appreciate the work and that appreciate their opinions, but I don't want to build something across a shared love. Like, that's not what I'm interested in. And I want to always maintain that objectivity. I do find the reason so many people think I'm a Nuggets fan is because I do talk about the team favorably because they're the team I cover. And I've kind of come to accept, it's inevitable. Like, you're just never going to be able to cover a team and not feel a preferential way towards them because of your experience with the people, not just the players or the coaches or the front office, but I know the guy that's the security guard outside of the locker room and the people that work in the pantry. Like, there's all these people and the fans that are there at every single game. So that community has an impact on you. But I think for me, I do want it kind of known as look, if I'm saying something about Denver, if I say something positive, it's not coming from I want Denver to be good. It's they actually are good. I have trashed this team when they have been awful. I have absolutely ripped this team to shreds. When they make mistakes, I'm critical of them. And you try and be as honest and accurate is the biggest word I use. I want to be accurate. And I think it's really hard to be accurate when you're a fan because I think those agendas wind up impacting the way that you view things.
How long have you been covering the Nuggets, and how did you end up covering them in the first place?
This is my 13th season. I moved here in 2012. I was living in Kansas City and I got my first full-time writing job for CBS. And if you think in your head, there's not a Kansas City team. And so we needed to find a team where I could go to games. My wife was ready for a career change and wanted to go back to school. And so we looked for graduate schools in English that were near an NBA team. And then her family is from Western Nebraska. And so we kind of correlated the three. And I was like, yes, the Nuggets. Awesome. I was like, they have George Karl. He's not going anywhere. Masai Ujiri is the bright new GM everyone loves. He's going to be around for a decade. They have all these players that they can trade. They're going to be good for an infinite amount of time, like Gallo and Ty Lawson and Wilson Chandler. They have all these assets. This is a great situation. And then they lost to the Warriors and George got fired and Masai left and everything fell into darkness. And so that was very much a learning experience for me. But yeah, that's how I ended up in Denver. My wife actually lived here when I met her. I was living in Austin, Texas, and she lived here. And my parents used to live in Colorado Springs. So I was very familiar with Colorado. And so this made it a very easy transition for us. And we love living here. And I love living in Colorado.
Well, then the darkness was lifted and Jokic was drafted, and that was a pretty unique spot for you to be in with
Well,
that type of player
was the
coming in.
darkness lifted when Jokic was drafted?
No, but I mean, eventually.
In time, pretty quickly actually, because the same year that he was drafted, Malone took over, and they cleared out the roster. It was like a simultaneous like culture reset, get rid of the knuckleheads, and then like really, I try and remember what it was like, but it was like, oh yeah, hey, Jokic can play a little bit, and I was like, oh yeah, Jokic is pretty good, and then like 3 years later, is Jokic like the best player in the league? Is that a thing? So yeah, it was quick.
So at any given moment, if you check your replies, you are a Jokic hater and a Nuggets antagonist. But the next minute, you check the next set of replies, you're a Jamal Murray apologist. I like to call this the duality of fan. But your account really is kind of like a fan Rorschach test when you follow it kind of consistently. And I was listening to your appearance on the Basketball Feelings podcast with Katie Heindel. So I know that you went to school for psychology. So I have to ask, is your Twitter account a psychological experiment?
It is not a psychological experiment. I will tell you, I am fascinated by fan behavior. I love that all these different fan bases have like different identities. That some fans, like Bulls fans, are nihilists, just complete nihilists.
I mean, understandably.
Nuggets fans were very woebegone with Nug life for years and years and years. And then you have fans like the Sixers and the Rockets and the Lakers who are assholes. And like, that's just like their identity. And so like, there's like all these different ways that you can kind of look at it. I think one of the things is I talk to the fans as much as I do because I still hold this. And like, there's a lot of people that disagree with me and are like, you shouldn't do this because it's beneath you. And I agree that it's beneath me when I let it impact me mentally, but that's more a sign of where I'm at than it is where they are. I do at my core believe that everybody deserves to have their opinion heard. That like, okay, if you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm expressing this opinion or I have this question, that like, I don't think I'm better than you. I don't think that I'm above you. And so like, I want to be able to respond to those things and try and have a conversation because I do learn a lot from fans. I do think like it's one of the things is I follow so many accounts because I want to try and learn from them. I'm always on Reddit searching through things to try and find information. I listen to the other Locked On podcasts because I want to hear what those fans are saying about their team because you'll pick up on little bits of information that provide the tapestry. And like for me, that's my entire approach is I am not a focused individual. I'm not like, well, I care about this and I don't care about all this other stuff. I care about all of it. Like you need to synthesize the entire league and as much information as possible. And so you can learn a lot. I do find though that for me, there's always a struggle with, I mentioned the agendas thing. I'm just by nature and by the education that I got, and I think it was more that like I have this feeling and then I pursued that education of just like these biases and feelings that you have are going to impact your starting point in any opinion, discussion, analysis. Okay, but like, is that real? Is that true? It can be true. You can be biased and right. That happens all the time. But I'm really interested in that kind of dynamic to discover, all right, do you feel this way because you've looked at the evidence and this is the conclusion? Or do you feel this way because it's what you want? And that question of those two things, I think, is interesting to kind of parse through.
I think it's clear that that's what you do. Obviously, fans may be upset when your opinion doesn't align with what they want. And there are some fans' tolerances who do better with criticism and some who don't. But we did have a question from our friend, Mile High Aki, who asked you,
tongue in cheek.
what is the secret to being the jolliest fella in NBA media? And I feel like what you just went over kind of covers that. I honestly do think you do give people a pretty fair shake. You maybe sometimes can be appropriately harsh, I think, in your response, which I love personally. Is there anything you want to add?
So I think what's interesting here is the perception from Twitter, and I think even on Locked On Nuggets, because I'm going to be pretty critical in the analysis. I think there's an idea of like the idea of like you must be a miserable human being, or because I complain so much about this, that, or the other with the league. I don't think anybody could spend as much time as I do on this if they didn't love it. I just don't think that they could, even if the money was much, 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 much better than it is. I don't think you could do it, and I think that it would reflect a lot more in the way that I cover it. You can make a lot of you can levy criticism against my conclusions because I think I'm often wrong, but you can't criticize the question of whether or not I'm working. Like, this isn't a TV thing where it's like, they're just not like, unless they can get some rebounds, when it's like, well, actually they lead the league in rebounding rate. You see that on television a lot. That just like these things that are clearly based off of prior opinions that haven't been updated. Like, I do the work. And the reality is in my day-to-day life, though I struggle with mental health like everybody I think does, I have a really wonderful family. I get to do a job that I absolutely love, and my life's really pretty good. I'm pretty happy most of the time. I'm pretty optimistic most of the time. And I just think that we tend to believe that these things, I once asked Howard Beck, who I think belongs in the Hall of Fame. I asked him on a CBS podcast, I said, how much of the players that we talk to, how much of them do you think we get? What slice of them do we get? And the answer was really interesting, talked about it's somewhere between 25 and 40%. And that's like the reality is like, we don't know each other. Like, I never, ever assume I know what type of person any of the players that I cover are, because I only get one shade of them for very limited pieces of time in one direct setting. And you just can't make conclusions about who these people are. I've covered Nikola Jokic for 10 years. I have no idea who he is. No idea. I know who he is with me. I know who he is on the court. I know what people say about him, but that's it. And I think that we would all do better to kind of leave open the possibility and not fill in the blanks on people we don't know.
I wanted to ask you about a prediction or piece of analysis that you had last preseason that I found to be particularly insightful. One of the most, I think, salient things that I heard as a prediction going into last NBA season was that the Warriors in particular might have a season where they are reaching really deep down to find that magic that they had during their run, and it just wouldn't be there. So I have to ask, what was your reaction watching the Warriors reach so deep down that they disemboweled themselves versus the Sacramento Kings in the play-in?
I mean, you always want to be right. It always feels good when you make a prediction and it comes right, because you're going to get so many things wrong. So you're like, you hold on to those very tightly. But one of the things that is better about that is just to be like, okay, you have a theory and you've tested it. And a lot of times it's not always going to come true. But in this case, like, it's another piece of evidence to kind of use. Like, oh, I learned something. Like, okay, I had this theory existing of these teams that I've seen in this position before. And even if it's not even questioning the theory itself, it's more, this is who the Warriors are now. And they're going to have to reinvent themselves if they're not going to fall into this trap again. I think you can argue this season that they at least look like they are, because the young kids have taken a step and it looks like the new additions are providing what they were designed to provide. But I do think it's like, it's foreshadowing, right? Where, okay, Clay reached down and didn't have it, but everyone's like, but Draymond and Curry are fine. And I'm like, look, Curry's last 2 months of the season, some of the metrics really showed a slide. And if he reaches down and it's not there all the time, what does that mean for Golden State? It presents like a whole bunch of different questions. So I think it's very important. Take the wins because they're very rare, because sports is unpredictable. But I also think it's like really important to instead, like, when you're right about something, try and learn something from what you were right about. I think that's the big thing.
Well, let's move on to what we may be right or wrong about in assessing the Nuggets specifically this preseason, because they have yet to win a game, which you have warned fans may be more concerning than they may think on the outset, since we're so often just writing preseason off. So we're going to do a real or fake segment that we've done on the show before, and we're going to start with their expected win total. You had a great stat on Locked On the other day about teams who didn't win a preseason game and the frequency in which they fail to hit that total. So where are you standing on Denver Nuggets going into the season? Real or fake that they go under?
Since 2013, teams that are winless in the preseason are 7-3 to the under on their expected win total. I lean heavily towards the under. I bet the under when the numbers first came out at 52.5. That was too high. At 50.5, I am a very content to pass and just lean heavily on the under. Projections, I have them lower. That's not uncommon because they don't grade out in a lot of the key metrics for me that indicate that usually are how you can extrapolate team strength. And so if they are not as good in clutch time, and even last year their clutch time record wasn't all that phenomenal, wasn't standout, and so you can be like they won 57 games and their clutch time record wasn't insane. So what does that say? I think there's a lot of indications that this is probably an under season. There's just like a wide disparity between an under season and a flaming disaster, and trying to figure that out is I think where most of the reporters, fans, and analysts are at right now with this team. So I would lean heavily towards the under, but with the market currently at 50.5, moving down a full 2 wins, I can't recommend it because I think Jokic might just be automatically worth 50 with a reasonable supporting cast, which he absolutely has.
People may be confused about preseason and what might translate to regular season. Mike Malone even talked about in his presser after the last game that we lost about the guys really playing, the true rotations being there, that they'll be fine for the most part. He says there's things they need to fix. What things from the preseason might carry over to regular season, if anything?
I think most of the stat stuff, actually, I think you can toss. So this is what's kind of funny is I'm sitting here telling you that the record matters, but the numbers don't. Shooting variance is going to be very, very wild in preseason. Like it's just, you will look up and down and be like, oh, this guy was absolutely wretched. And depending on the player's narrative, it matters. If Jalen Brunson goes 3 of 12, no one's going to bat an eye. Everyone's going to be like, yeah, Brunson didn't shoot well in the preseason game. But if Jamal goes 3 of 12, oh God, Jamal's broken, right? And so that's where you really can't do it because you kind of need to.
Well, I would be like, oh my God, Jamal took 12 threes? That's great.
Right. So like you kind of have to kind of blanket everything in preseason with the stats with the preseason thing. The win-loss thing, the reason I think it matters is you need to find a way to win a game. Like you need to be able to find, you can't be so bad that you lose all of them. Now, like the 2008 Celtics, winless in preseason, won the title. So like there's always these counter
I was going to ask, has a team ever gone winless in preseason and won the title?
Yeah, 2008 Celtics. So it's entirely possible. I'm just telling you that it's not the way I would kind of put it is it's not a good sign. Like that's what I would largely tell you. Because if you want to say like, what about the 2008 Celtics? And I would say, yeah, they won the title. There's also the 2013 Lakers, who was one of the absolute greatest just train wrecks. Flaming train wreck into a hazmat zone that you have ever seen. And they were winless in preseason. Conversely, by the way, teams that go undefeated in preseason are 11-5 to the over on their win total. They outperform expectations because they have momentum and things are going well and the team's bought in and there's energy. And a lot of this just does get into like a vibes thing. I really do think that this is a thing. I do tend to make adjustments based off of preseason play, based off of, does this team look like they're engaged and excited and ready to go? Or do they look like either if they're a bad team, yeah, no, we're going to be awful and I'm just here for the check, the Wizards, or yeah, we're supposed to contend, but I'm just like so tired and bored, which is more like what I've seen a few times at Ball Arena.
Is that something you often account for in like your analysis and your models? And, obviously you're around the team a lot, so you have more insight into that often. And I think there was some part of the Nuggets that talked about their vibes being low on the title defense year, and Russ is coming in and there's been messages about him raising the vibes and the energy. Are you able to track kind of good and bad vibes throughout the season in a pattern where you're like, it's around the All-Star break, people are kind of down and ready for a break, and you're factoring all that in that context?
There's levels. There's like the team's in a slump right now. Team's not playing well. And then sometimes you'll talk to a reporter that covers a team and they'll be very honest with you and be like, they're in a bad place. Like it's bad in the locker room. And that to me matters more. Now, I don't think you can quantify that. You can make manual adjustments if you're doing a power rating based off of that, I think to a certain degree, but you got to be very cautious with it because they also turn very quickly. Like a good example of this is if a team is just in a rotten place and everyone's unhappy and they've been on a long road trip and all of this, but then it's like, oh, they went out and they got pizza and they played laser tag. And that was really fun. And like, they just bonded. Like literally, like they're humans. Like this stuff happens. If you're having a really crappy month at work or year at work, and then there's like a company get together and you get to know your office mates a little bit better. And you're just like, no, I feel like I know them better. And I feel like I like them. that's going to change. It's just going to change the productivity levels. It just will. And there's like a million studies on this. So you have to be very cautious with it, and you have to not make too much of an assumption. But I do think, if anything, it's like, for me, vibes are always a cautionary tale or a reason for optimism. They're not something to make hard adjustments off of because they are so ephemeral.
You can ascribe real or fake to these two players. I'm going to kind of group them together. Okay. MPJ and Julian Strother. We're going to hit on the math question later related to three-point shooting with the Nuggets, and these are two players who could provide more volume and a possible solution to that. I think fans have been frustrated with the team's maybe lack of involvement with MPJ for whatever reason, but it seems like he's having a pretty good showing so far. He showed up to training camp in good shape. He's mentioned his weight, 236 pounds, I believe he said. Julian Strother has been pretty much right where he left off before the injury last season and is showing some progress, and he worked a ton this offseason.
I think he looks better.
Even
which
that.
He should now after another year in the NBA.
If MPJ was going to have a career year, let's say, what would be that like mark, and what would he have to hit?
Okay. I will just, the question here is, he's primed to have a career year, real or fake, and I'll say real. Everything that he's doing in these clips, he is sharper, he is smarter, he is more decisive. His handle is better, his decision making is quicker. He's not delaying.
Oh my God, the handle. That was
like, but that's the thing, is like, his handle used to be so bad. Like, it was just like a real problem. He was completely out of control. And now he looks very much like he's in control, to where he can actually challenge things. And that's making it to where he's getting better looks that are not so wild. He can make wild shots, but he doesn't need to take them all the time. And so we're seeing that a lot more. I still don't like his step back all that much. I still feel like he's fading too much on it. But he looks like an entirely different player. And what's funny is, when I used to be like, they need to run some sets for him to get him used to doing these types of things. And the counter argument to that, and one of the things that I think, and Michael Malone has kind of said this in the pressers, is MPJ's helping himself because he's being decisive and making these things happen. Like, be the initiator, be the change you want to see in the world. Like, that's what he's doing, is like, he's actually taking the initiative and being like, I'm not going to wait for somebody to set me up. I'm not going to play passive. I am good enough now to be able to do this. And so a lot of it is, he was cast into a role because honestly, MPJ was not able to do those other things that people wanted to see him have the potential to do, because the Nuggets saw in practice he wasn't ready for it. And now he is. Like, he's just looks leveled up in all of these things. It's not like, oh, he's bigger. So it's, he's bigger, and he's bigger, and he's sharper, and he was more in control, and the handle's better, and he's more decisive. And he looks like a 3-level scorer to me. And I think you got to get ready for a career year from MPJ, because right now I'll say that he looks like the second best player on the Nuggets.
Real quick, if we want to go to Julian, the question was real or fake. Will he be in the playoff rotation? Because I think we all agree he'll be an NBA rotation player. How do you feel about the playoffs? It's super early right now, but
I will say, I'll say fake. And I that's not really about Julian. It's more about, the question is, can you bench Russ or not? Like, do I think he should be in the rotation? Yes. Julian Strother should be in the rotation. Russell Westbrook should not be in the playoff rotation. And that, I don't love saying that because I like Russ a lot. But what's going to happen is that, like, Russ is going to get those playoff minutes, and they're going to be bad, and everyone's going to complain about him. And the math game will be an issue in the bench minutes, and all of these kind of problems will pile up. Like, that's just very likely. If that is not the case, and I'm wrong on that, and Russ is both okay with, and Malone is empowered enough to be like, Russ, this is not your series. We need you next series. I need more spacing on the floor. And Julian plays next to Jamal, then I think that Julian will do just fine. I don't have worries about Julian being able to play in a playoff series. I really do think he can contribute, and he is in control enough to be able to limit the damage of young player mistakes that he would provide, especially after another 6 months of being in the rotation. But with where we're at right now, I think we're at an 8-man rotation. Starters, Watson, Saric, Russ. That's where I think we're at right now.
Right, yeah. I mean, we had PWat getting more minutes last season, didn't make the playoff rotation, or at least he was in it and then was out of it. So it can happen with, your second year players who look promising and something, how Malone is, sometimes a shorter leash on some players. Now, especially with KCP gone and more room for CB and Strother. So speaking of CB, Grace, what you want to set up this one?
Oh, okay. I wasn't ready for you to tee that up for me. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Christian Braun's preseason. He's been kind of up and down. We saw some of his defensive upside in the couple of games in Abu Dhabi, saw some of what he might be able to do on offense, but the last 2 games in Denver, he's really struggled to, I think, find an offensive stride and look comfortable when he gets the ball. He seems like somebody who doesn't want the ball for the most part. And that's more troubling to me than if he was missing shots or whatever it is, because I'm worried about the level of aggression. And so my real or fake is whether his reticence to attack is something that's going to tank the starters' offense below the threshold that's needed to make this team a top team in the West, one of the top teams in the West.
I'll say fake, and the reason is because of the nature of the NBA season. So most guys don't look at the scouting report at all. The ones that do are going to look at it maybe the night before, usually either at shoot around, sitting at their locker, or before a game at their locker on the iPad, right? The question is just how often and how high will you can help off of Christian Braun get on the scouting report to where defenders are actively oh, this is the game plan. We want to help off of CB and bring help elsewhere. And I just don't think that will happen enough. I don't think CB is going to carry the shooting gravity that KCP did. That's why I hate that comparison of KCP only shot 4 threes per game. Yeah, because they defended him. And so with CB, that's not going to be the case. You're going to see guys definitely test him more. So will the starters offense be worse than last year? Yeah. Will it be worse than the year before? Yeah, it's going to be worse. Will the overall net impact be significant enough to tank them? No. So they'll be fine because Jokic, Murray, Gordon, and MPJ are good enough. If there is a point where this is if I am not oh no, it's nothing to worry about, they can manage it, then things have gone horribly, horribly wrong. Because your floor is just so high with Yoke. It's just so freaking high. And that's not to say that I think that the players that he was with in the years without Murray and MPJ were horrible, because I don't think they were. I think they were pretty good offensive players, but still the overall spacing and things like that, Yoke still made it work and the offense was still killer. And so CB is a good enough defender for that to offset, and they'll be fine in terms of net rating. It'll be fine. If it's not, then it's a complete disaster, and then there's going to be a lot of ripple effects from it. But for right now, even though I am decidedly lower on Christian than all of my colleagues in the media room as a starter, I want to be very clear on that. Not Christian as an NBA player or a long-term vet. I have reticence about him being in this starting role at this point in his career. That's it. Even despite that, I don't think he'll tank the offense.
Yeah, we don't really have another defensive guard in the case that Christian would get played off the floor because of the offense. And so something that I've been thinking about a lot is wow, we could really use a two-way perimeter player who could, also guard at a high level. Kind of gave that up this summer. But another one who's kind of been on the short list in my mind for, potentially playing some minutes with the starters, even though Malone hasn't really seemed to give it too much seriousness, is Peyton Watson, who we haven't gotten to see this preseason because of his hamstring injury. But he could shoot from 3, just league average. Does that actually solve 50% of our roster issues, real or fake?
I don't think it solves it, but God, it would help. I actually think that the 2-guard spot should be matchup dependent. I really think it should be, hey, we're facing a team with a very low offensive ceiling here. Let's have CB come in and just absolutely lock them down, and then we'll win this game with moderate offense. And then in different games be we need high switchability and playmaking defensively. I think the Thunder are a matchup where I want to see as much Peyton Watson as possible. I would love to see him in that kind of a starting position. But if he's able to shoot, then you now have your second unit in the minutes in which Jamal isn't running it. And even if he is, all right, if it's Jamal, Russ, Watson, I guess Hunter Tyson,
Or
and
Zeke.
Sarek, right? Or Zeke. Now you have like spacing. You have 5 out spacing, and that's actually 5 out spacing. As well as if Peyton is playing in those stagger minutes at the end of the first and the end of the third, now you're able to really be like, okay, we can put Peyton in next to Nicola, space the floor out with 1 in 5 out or 1 in 4 out, and then we can put MPJ with the bench unit, and that's going to boost them up. Like there's all these opportunities that him being able to play that role would provide. The Nuggets wouldn't take advantage of all of them because someone, I don't know who in the organization, whether it's coaching or front office or an agent, is just like, no, Jamal Murray gets the non-Jokic minutes. And I'm like, this is dumb. But there's all these other things that open up if Peyton's able to do that. I believe that the future for Peyton Watson is he's going to be a 3-level scorer. And that's just going to change fundamentally everything about him. He's just not in a great position to make that leap right now based off of the injury that he's having to deal with in preseason.
Not being able to play. Ryan Blackburn put out a tweet yesterday after that not devastating, but it was a bad loss to OKC yesterday about what's your top concern coming out of that game. And mine still is that the AG extension hasn't happened yet. I sensed a shift in tone at Media Day from Calvin Booth with respect to the urgency that the team has to contend. He said things like, we are halfway through a 10-year window. We probably have an even greater appreciation of how hard it is to win. This was in response to questions about what happened last year. And we probably have 5 more single shots and every shot counts. Those were direct quotes from Media Day. And I want to know if that sense in tone that or that shift in tone that I sensed is real or fake.
Fake. Media Day was politics. And there's a reason that Malone and Booth did them independently. And the team will be like, no, it's just like a timing thing. And I'm like, okay. You've got Malone saying, we have enough shooters, not complaining about the roster. Like, we've got the guys. It's going to be hard, but we've got the guys as a see, I'm in line. Like, I'm not out here like criticizing the front office. And then you have Booth saying like, yeah, shooting's an issue. Like, we know that. And like, there's still stuff that we've got to do. And we've got an urgency as like I want to win. We all want to win. We want to win the title because, and also like Booth's fighting against the perception that he's so focused on the future that he's overlooking the now. Right. So it's all like, that's all like a political structured in my opinion. It's not that I don't think that Calvin has like an urgency, because I think that there is like, no, we can win. But I think the difference is, do we need to win now? Yeah, but we also can win now. Like, we can win now and later. We can do this. We can do both. And that question is where the tension arises, is the idea of margins. And they're being shown to be a lot tighter, in part because of the CBA and decisions were made before then. But also like, look, decisions were made like giving Jalen Pickett a multi-year guaranteed deal. I want to be very clear. Front offices get to make mistakes. Sam Presti is like far and away the best front office leader in the NBA. There is nobody close to me. It is not like there is a gap between everybody else and Presti. Presti whiffed on Gordon Hayward. Like, Trey Mann looks like he might be a 6th man of the year candidate in Charlotte. Whiffed on Gordon and admitted it. Was like, yeah, that was a huge mistake. I messed up. Like, that happens. Tim Connelly built a title-winning team. You know what he did the first time that he tried to do that? He signed Nate Robinson and J.J. Hickson as the quote-unquote glue chemistry leadership guys. There were all these mistakes that front offices make, and it's okay for that. Like, Malone's made mistakes, and he'll tell you all about them as long as the cameras aren't on. Like, there's all these kind of things that happen, and so I think that there is an urgency, and I think especially there's getting to be a little bit like there's a lot of heat on everybody right now. The whole situation feels very much like the temperature's rising and hasn't burst into flame yet, and you're hoping that it doesn't reach the point where it does. But I don't think necessarily that the urgency that you felt is going to be conveyed or will result in a change in approach from the front office.
So, related to that and what I was saying about my concern, are the Nuggets going to go into the season without extending Aaron Gordon?
So I'm going to throw Ryan Blackburn under the bus right now. Ryan had been tweeting about the deadline for AG to get extended and just came out with, hey, I want to clarify this. He can get extended anytime throughout the season.
Wait, really?
Yeah. And I hadn't double checked it because I trust Ryan.
I
So
need
I'm
to
just
double
like
check
throwing
that
Ryan.
because I'd heard it from multiple sources. So I
Apparently
need to
somebody-
double check that. That
Apparently,
is-
somebody in the Nuggets I would assume somebody in the Nuggets organization reached out to Ryan to be like, "Hey, by the way, I just continue to not be worried about it, and maybe this is foolish, and maybe they're gonna let him go." There is just such a huge gap between KCP and Aaron Gordon, and I think the fan perception is that they were a little bit closer. It's like, well, you let KCP go, and he was really good and helped contribute to the title, and I'm like, Aaron was the piece. He was the cash in. And he has worked out so much better than anyone could have expected. And he has an incredible relationship with Nikola Jokic, who you kind of need to keep happy given how everything is going. The idea of them letting him go is such a tactical misstep that I am incredulous to the possibility. Does that mean that it's absolutely not going to then it will happen? No, because I haven't asked the front office, hey, are you absolutely 100% going to get an extension with Aaron Gordon? Because they would never answer that because they'd be like, well, it all depends. Never want to get boxed in. I will continue to believe that I'm not going to worry about an Aaron, and I would advise this very much. Don't worry about it until it's a thing. There's enough other things to worry about with Denver rather than what's going to happen this summer.
Right. The reason I bring it up is that after the title run, there was so much made about the fact that everyone had gotten paid. Everybody was rowing in the same direction. There weren't all the questions that we've had throughout this offseason about, are they going to re-sign KCP? Yes or no? The answer was no. Are they going to extend Jamal or not? Yes or no? And now the questions about AG, because all this stuff is just kind of coming up at the same time,
right,
that I wonder, what that could mean in terms of affecting the season itself.
I'll just say this. If they let Aaron Gordon walk, I think the chances of Nikola Jokic not being on the Denver Nuggets in 3 seasons go up dramatically by over 20%.
Wow. Okay. You heard it here.
Better get it done.
First, folks.
Listeners, please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1K subs, so please subscribe if you like what you heard on today's episode. And also subscribe to our Clip channel. And remember, winning is fun, and hopefully we get a lot of winning in the regular season, and not a lot of losing, because losing really sucks.